Lascion Corla and Deputies, I move the counter-motion on behalf of the Government. It has been impossible to witness the events in the Middle East since the 7th of October without utter dismay, horror and ever-increasing anger and alarm. I have no doubt that members across the Dáil share these sentiments, and I know the Irish public do too. I will shortly address the matter of the motion tabled today by People Before Profit, but before I do so, I would like to look at the broader situation. First, I would like to welcome the news breaking last night and early this morning of agreement between Israel and Hamas on the release of some hostages held in Gaza and a limited truce. While full details of what has been agreed and the timings are still emerging, this is an important and positive step and will hopefully facilitate the access to humanitarian assistance needed so urgently by the people of Gaza and return some of those held by Hamas to their loved ones. Our focus in particular is on 9-year-old Irish citizen Emily Hand. I know deputies will understand if I do not go into detail on Emily's case. We have worked consistently for her release over recent weeks, including through extensive contacts with regional partners. I want to take this chance to note that Ireland unreservedly condemns the practice of hostage-taking and appeals for the immediate release of all remaining hostages. The efforts of the US, Qatar and Egypt in securing this agreement are to be commended. Their work highlights the value of effective diplomacy. Lascion Corla, this release of hostages and truce have potential to be an important step towards a de-escalation of this conflict, and we urge all parties to now prioritise the humanitarian needs of Gaza's civilian population, extend any ceasefire and find a way to return to the negotiating table. Ireland is widely recognised to have projected global leadership on this crisis since October the 7th. We have taken a principled, human-centred approach and rightly stressed the need to protect ordinary people thrust into the front lines of terrible conflict. International humanitarian law is there to protect the most vulnerable in our darkest moments. I am proud of the Government's principled approach to this conflict, and those principles will continue to underpin our work. I am pleased to note that 51 Irish citizens and dependents have now been assisted to leave Gaza via the Rafah crossing into Egypt by our Department of Foreign Affairs. And I would put it this in the context of what has just been said. Motions didn't get these Irish citizens out of Gaza, diplomacy did. And that's the bottom line. A small number of Irish citizens remain in Gaza. Ireland will continue to work tirelessly with the relevant authorities, and that includes Israel, who have a huge say in terms of who leaves Gaza right now, whether you like it or not. And getting rid of diplomatic channels would not in any way have helped to get Irish citizens out of Gaza, or indeed their dependents. And we will continue to work tirelessly with the relevant authorities on additional cases where these arise and to assist in instances where other Irish citizens and dependents wish to exit Gaza. The assistance provided to Irish citizens in Gaza is a practical demonstration of the value of diplomacy in highly challenging circumstances. And I want to take this opportunity to commend our dedicated teams in Dublin and on the ground in Egypt, Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. They have been doing extraordinary work since the beginning of the crisis, and I think it's important for all deputies in this House to recognise that. I attended the European Union Foreign Affairs Council on Monday and took the opportunity to report on my visit to the region. Many interventions at the Council echoed points that I made several weeks ago earlier in this conflict. Our perspective is influential at a European level. There is a growing realisation among Member States that the European Union needs to do much more to deliver a two-state solution to ensure peace and security for both Israelis and Palestinians. Last week I visited Egypt, Israel and the West Bank. Deputy Murphy omitted to mention my visit to Egypt and my visit to the West Bank, and was part of a broader disinformation campaign that followed my visit, which in itself was illustrative in terms of how people want either to undermine objectivity and impartiality and fair assessment of how we all approach this particular issue. But I had the opportunity to engage in person with a range of interlocutors. I took every opportunity to stress the need for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza, for de-escalation and for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, including Emily Hand. During my visit, I also visited the Sarat area in southern Israel, meeting with families and communities affected by the terrible Hamas attacks of the 7th of October. And I regret very much that Deputy Murphy seems to think that the visit to Kibbutz Be'eri was a propaganda visit. It was anything of the sort. It was horrific what I saw there, and I only saw the village destroyed and the neighbourhood destroyed. It is not wrong to do that and to visit that, and your outrageous assertion that that represented a propaganda sort of exercise, I think, is incomprehensible and shows a complete disregard for the loss of human life in respect of the mass attack on that particular neighbourhood, which I think is informative in itself. But our thoughts continue, and we have not forgotten, nor do we underestimate the impact of those brutal attacks on the people in Israel. Our thoughts continue to be with those who have been killed, including our fellow citizen Kim Dempsey, and those left bereaved, left terrorised, left injured, and those who have been taken hostage, and their families and communities. And in addition to the appalling suffering in Gaza, it's important also that we continue to highlight the increasing violence in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. This is a cause for serious concern, and Ireland redoubles our calls for the protection of civilians as a priority. At European level and in the region, there is deep concern about the situation in the West Bank, and it's something I will continue to raise. 200 Palestinians, including 52 children, have been killed by Israeli forces since the 7th of October, including most recently one death during armed clashes in the Jenin refugee camp. Alongside this, there has been a rise in settler violence and the displacement of Palestinian communities. This is absolutely unacceptable and also very dangerous. Such actions infringe on the rights of Palestinians and actively undermine the viability of a two-state solution, and it has to stop. President Biden has indicated that the United States is prepared to take steps to hold extremists attacking civilians in the West Bank to account. This includes issuing visa bans against violent settlers. I will advocate at European level for the European Union to follow suit and implement such sanctions against the individuals responsible. Accountability is the core plank of Irish foreign policy. In this context, Ireland voted in favour of UN General Assembly resolution, which included a request to the ICJ to produce an advisory opinion on the legal consequences arising from the policies and practices of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory. Last July, Ireland submitted a statement to the ICJ, including information relevant to the questions asked by the General Assembly. And Ireland will continue to be a leading voice in raising these issues. The government will continue to push for a halt to settler violence and forced displacement, while actively supporting the resilience of Palestinians living under threat. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is catastrophic and has worsened daily. The reports of the situation and the numbers of civilian casualties in Gaza are truly horrific, and most recent reports suggest that up to 14,000 people have been killed, over 1.5 million people have been displaced, a huge proportion of the population, which is totally unacceptable. Gaza's civilian population urgently needs food, water, medical supplies, and international agencies, including the UN, need sustained access and adequate fuel to ensure that these vital supplies can be distributed without further delay. I very much hope that the truce announced this morning will be the first step towards that essential sustained humanitarian access at scale. Amidst the terrible toll of civilian lives in Gaza are the deaths of over 100 UN staff. In addition, more than 200 healthcare workers have been killed in Gaza since the start of the war. Healthcare workers should never have to be exposed to such horror. We pay tribute to their bravery and that of all of the humanitarian workers in Gaza who continue to do their best to protect and preserve the lives of civilians. It is essential that the international community does more to protect these frontline workers, and in particular the provision of healthcare. A shocking number of journalists have also been killed in Gaza. Over 40 are now believed to have lost their lives. Reporting from a conflict, particularly in a context like Gaza, where there is little safety and no way to leave, is a tremendous act of courage. The work of journalists is essential to highlight and inform the wider world of the situation on the ground. No more lives should be lost, Glasgow Corla. Ireland has repeatedly and consistently called for a humanitarian ceasefire. I welcome today's news of progress towards this and call for it to be a durable and lasting humanitarian ceasefire. The very recent concern of this government about the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory is shared right across this House. However, the motion proposed by People for Profit, in our view, is naive, inaccurate and totally unacceptable, in that it would totally undermine our approach, relevance and capacity to influence, to what limited extent we can, the course of events. Ireland is rightly seen in the region rightly seen in the region and across Europe as offering bold and principled leadership on this crisis. This motion, if passed, I believe, would fatally undermine our efforts. The Government is clear that no airport in Ireland, whether Shannon or any other airport, is being used to transfer weapons to the Middle East or to any other war. This policy is well known and fully understood by our partners. No applications have been received or exemptions granted in relation to civil aircraft travelling to Israel since the start of the current conflict. In respect of sanctions, Ireland does not operate any unilateral sanction regimes, and the Government implements UN sanctions, European Union sanctions adopted as part of the common foreign and security policy. The Government is tabling a counter-motion today setting out an approach that sees Ireland engaging consistently and effectively at the highest international levels. Our approach is principled and grounded in international law and underlines our commitment to diplomacy and the multilateral system. Thank you, Count Corley.